Flight attendants and pilots of Reddit, what are some things that happen mid-flight that only the crew are aware of? As an air traffic controller, we are constantly swearing and yelling at pilots when we're not on the frequency, and then when we key up we use our nice guy voices. One of my all-time favorites is the captain accidentally broadcasting his passenger briefing, "Welcome aboard, weather in Chicago," and so on frequency instead of the aircraft PA system, blocking up ground, ramp, tower, etc. For a solid 15 seconds, you automatically become the laughingstock of the airport. Heard a pilot give an arrival PA to the cabin on 121.5 about 20 miles outside of my airspace once. Checked in 10 seconds later. Told him it was the finest PA I'd ever heard on guard, but he might want to give it again. Definitely didn't find it as funny as I did. A lady who was feeling very ill crapped her pants mid-flight. A very kind FA managed to get her covered in a blanket and into the bathroom with barely anyone noticing, and then gave her a pair of her own pants to wear so she wouldn't be embarrassed. Not sure if it's been mentioned already, I was learning to be cabin crew at college, and in the event that someone dies on board, the CC, cabin crew, make it less obvious that they have passed. Put glasses on them, maybe a hat. Essentially dress them up as subtle as possible to not alert and or panic the other passengers. Please don't disturb my friend. He's dead tired. I was only a month or two out of IOE, initial operating experience at my first airline job, flying right seat in a regional jet. I had just come back from the bathroom when the captain pointed that several flight instruments on his side had failed, and he had reverted to using data from my side. Basically told his main flight display to start using data from the second independent system soon. However, that went bad too. The autopilot disconnected, and here we were at 25,000 featuring or so, in icing, hand flying off a tiny little combined last-ditch backup instrument called an IESI, Integrated Electronic Standby Instrument. If memory serves, we declared an emergency, asked ATC to point us in the direction of better weather, and tried to figure out what the heck was happening. Icing on both primary pitot tubes maybe, though that shouldn't happen, they are heated. In any case, we ended up making a perfectly safe landing after a diversion, and the passengers never had any idea that, for a few minutes, I was really concerned that things were about to turn very, very bad and that we were down to our emergency backup gauge. That's the shortened version without most of the techno babble anyway. I've got an original one for you all. There is a radio frequency we all are required to monitor. It's called guard. It's for emergency use and is designed for maydays and for air traffic control to reach aircraft that may have lost radio contact, or to relay messages from aircraft to other aircraft, etc. Every day this frequency is abused. You will hear hundreds of professional aviators meowing, yelling obscenities at each other, and making fun of one airline or another. Oftentimes what will start it is some poor guy accidentally transmitting his PA announcement to passengers on the guard frequency, followed by the very mature outbreaks for about 5-10 minutes. It's the worst on the East Coast. The scariest moment of my day is when the FA opens the internal bag door, the closet we all throw our overnight bags in, without calling us in the flight deck first. That ding and master caution gets me every time. Airplane be like, oh crap, someone opened a freaking internal door. I know there's probably more to it than that, but there's a special frequency called guard that all aircraft are supposed to monitor. It's for emergencies, or for when an aircraft ends up on a wrong frequency and the controllers need to get contact with them to change them to the right frequency. It's full of pilots meowing at each other, and people accidentally asking for gate assignments and making other radio calls. Pilot here. We only get paid when the doors are closed and the pushback is commenced. If we're delayed or sitting with the door open, we're just as annoyed as you are. At altitude we're constantly in contact with air traffic control and change to different center frequencies, or control for other than US locations. We're also doing fuel checks to make sure the fuel burn isn't abnormal, dodging weather, and probably bitching about scheduling. Ex-airline employee here. Often we'd have someone on board with terrible body odor. You can set the temperature in one end of the cabin hotter and it localized the smell to one part of the plane. If you see coffee filter bags hanging anywhere, it's because someone smells like open butt somewhere on the plane. FARs often talk about the hot guy in 23B or whatever seat he's in. Pilots freak around a lot up front. They'll take pictures, post on FB, watch movies. Automation has taken over a lot of the work on long flights. The same mop that mops the lav, mops the galley. That's seriously nasty. Not an airline pilot yet. Just got hired by my first airline and start class next month. But I've been a pilot for 6 years. I primarily teach Chinese airline pilots how to fly, but I've done some passenger operations in business aircraft on the side. First of all the comments about pilots making cat sounds and Chewbacca noises is 100% true. Also, whenever someone leaves an area and switches frequencies, they yell "see ya," and then a dozen other pilots will key up yelling "see ya" one after another. We also enjoy talking crap about people who say with you, "Got M on the fish finder, any traffic please advise," and tree and fife. Also, the things that scare passengers don't faze the pilots one bit. We don't give a crap about turbulence or having to do a go around. The things I don't like are things you generally won't know about: thunderstorm dodging, microburst alerts, ice, maintenance issues, etc. Pilot here, late to the party as usual, but sometimes the passengers may be having a nice quiet flight in the back while the pilots are up front dodging thunderstorms and yelling their heads off. We will not only transport dead bodies, but also live transplants, like hearts and lungs. I particularly like the live transplants because we get to cut to the front of the line for takeoff and we get all the shortcuts to our destination. Tip for those who get motion sickness: try not to move your head around. Pilots move their eyes instead of their heads to look at the instruments in the flight deck. Also try to sit in a seat over the wing. This area of the plane doesn't rotate as much during climbs and descents. Flight attendants can't do pilot's job, but pilots can't do flight attendants' jobs for sure. We aren't hired for our people skills. Don't take off your shoes to go to the bathroom. People pee on the floor all the time. It amazes me when I see people walk into an airplane bathroom without their shoes on. An instructor told me that he and his training buddy both fell asleep for about 45 minutes at the same time, while gaining hours for licensing. The plane was in complete autopilot mode. Clear skies, zero turbulence. They both swore if they ever flew again they would hand off sleep like handing off the controls. I wish I had someone to hand me off in my sleep. My uncle was a pilot. He says that most people don't understand how much of the airplane is run by computers. The pilots are necessary, but a lot of the elements of flying are automated nowadays. There's a joke about the Airbus A380 that goes, "The A380 comes with a pilot and a dog. The pilot is there to feed the dog. The dog is there to bark at the pilot if he tries to touch anything." Pilot is sleeping and co-pilot is flying and there are dead bodies in the cargo. Source: my mom, who is a former flight attendant. On longer flights, bigger airplanes, they even have a special room where the flight crew can get some sleep. Don't fly with an ear infection or fluid in your ears. There is a chance you can rupture your eardrum. Flight crews are especially susceptible to this since we are constantly going through pressurization and depressurization when we work. I used to travel a lot for work, and I made this mistake thinking I wasn't that sick. I could feel the pressure slowly leave my inner ear during ascent. During descent my ears wouldn't equalize and I thought they were going to implode. That was a very painful 5 days of antibiotics while I was waiting for the infection to go away enough that my ears could equalize again. There's a 600-page book in the cockpit with every single thing that can possibly go wrong. From a bulb going out to an engine falling off, a biohazard or a bomb threat. Well, not everything. Pilot here. Most of the time the passengers are not given the full answer on why a flight is delayed or cancelled. Airlines will typically blame cancellations on unrelated events, weather, instead of mechanical issues, so they don't have to pay for hotel rooms, meals, etc. Also, chemtrails are not real. For those of you who believe they are real, give your head a shake. FA here. At mid-flight I noticed a strange thing with one of the slides was not armed properly and had an issue with it. However, we landed safely and nobody of the packs knew nothing. Flying Paris, Seattle. Normal uneventful flight. I don't think there was Wi-Fi available on the flight. When we land, we are greeted by tons of heavily armed National Guard, police, TSAR, canines. The Paris terror attacks happened about an hour or so into our flight. Passengers had no idea that the attack had happened until everyone got cell phone reception and floods of "Are you okay?" texts. I assume the crew knew the whole time, as soon as it happened. Never said a word about it. Pilot here. Guard frequency is basically pilot Reddit. It's just people meowing and making fart noises. It's literally set up to monitor for aircraft in distress, emergencies or radios being in the wrong frequency, but it's so safe here in the US to fly that it's basically one big meme. A former teacher told us a story that fits the question. Every year he would make trips to Europe that were for an educational experience, or related to the subject he taught in one way or another. In reality, it was just an amazing way to spend 2 weeks in Europe. One year he took a student's brother with, since he needed an extra person to have the minimum amount of required students. After the 10-hour flight, the flight attendant walks up to him and asks if said brother was a part of his group. He says yes. Apparently, on the flight he stopped the flight attendant and asked her to have sex with him in the bathroom. She denied, but he continued to ask her several more times through the flight. It reached a point to where she no longer felt anywhere near comfortable. She asked my teacher if she could notify the authorities and have him sent back to the States. He agreed. There were no immediate flights back home, so a distant relative of his had to be contacted. He stayed with a relative he had never even met for an entire weekend. He was then put on a flight back home the following week. Teacher dodged a bullet of having to deal with him for 2 weeks in Europe. Flight attendants don't get paid on the ground. Only flying hours are paid. We are slave labor on the ground and duties are continually added to our unpaid work time because the company knows they don't have to pay us. We show up 2 to 3 hours before we even start getting paid, and some days we will work up to 14 hours and only get paid for 5 or 6 of those hours. It should be illegal. Please be kind when you are boarding the plane and getting all pissy about your bags etc. The flight attendant is a volunteer while she is helping you on the ground. She is essentially doing you a favor. I don't understand how this is legal, or how it's justified. It's not like you're not working before the plane pulls back from the gate. That the captain had a heart attack and passed away mid-flight, and he's the reason we have to have an unscheduled stop, not to refuel. We sat in a backed up queue for hours in Denver one time. The weather had the airport socked in. Nobody was going anywhere until this giant supercell cleared the end of the runway. During that time suddenly there appeared a mechanic at the front of the cabin on the PA holding up a 2-foot-long piece of metal he had pulled from one of the tires. He explained if the plane hadn't been sitting waiting he might have never spotted it. It could have come flying out during takeoff roll and penetrated the plane's wing, igniting fuel, or whatever. Everyone cheered him. What a hero. He possibly saved our lives. To this day I have no idea why they let him come on board and tell us this. To make you less pee about the delay. Former flight attendant here. Landing gear got stuck on descent. We flew in circles for ages just waiting to find out if we needed to crash land or not. Luckily the gear eventually came down. Passengers never knew something was wrong. One time I accidentally spilled coffee creamer on a bald dude's head while he was sleeping during service. Myself and everyone around him silently agreed to say nothing. He looked as if a bird pooped on his head. I still feel guilty about it. Never drink the coffee. I have never seen those machines cleaned. The pots get cleaned with CLR when they're removed and sent for repair. Hope that helps you feel better. Source: I'm an avionics technician. Clean the pots while working at an FAA repair station. FA here. Crop dusting. Basically farting whilst we walk down the aisle due to the bloating. If you fly frequently there's a high chance an FA has farted right by your head as they walked down the aisle. This is another reason I always go for the window seat. Ex-ground crew here. On a Boeing 777-300 near the back galley, there is a hidden door that is approx 24 inches wide. Once you open that door, there is a small staircase that brings you to the crew rest area where there are a few beds. My cousin is a flight attendant. It's not mid-flight, but airplane lines will fly attendants all over the country just in case they're needed elsewhere. My cousin had to fly out from Portland to Seattle and some other places all in one trip, never having to work. Also, if you are sick you have to show up anyway and let the people in charge decide if you can fly or not. If you don't, you get 3 warnings then you're fired. I've had a flight delayed because they were flying in more flight attendants whose flight was also delayed. This was like 2 days after the underwear bomber. I've had one near collision in my 11-year airline career but have had a few TCAS, traffic avoidance collision system, warnings where the other pilot or myself, depending on who was flying at the time, have had to comply with the airplane's instructions to climb or descend to avoid another airplane. Career pilot and former instructor check Airman here. If you ever see a crazy and or panicked passenger trying to open an emergency exit in flight up at altitude, don't worry, just laugh and enjoy the show. They won't get that crap open. Guaranteed. Most airplane doors, exits, etc. are called plug doors, meaning the door is bigger than the opening it occupies. At cruise altitude, a typical jet will hold a cabin differential of about 8c. Their difference between outside air and inside air. So, figure the surface area of the door in square inches and then multiply by it 8. The resulting figure will be in the thousands of pounds and no one will ever pull it open. And speaking of pressurization, I know all you passengers think you're breathing the same air for XX hours. That's true only to an extent. I think you probably get sick on a flight not so much because of the air, it's the things you touch. How often do you think the interior is wiped down and disinfected? Oh sure, trash gets picked up etc, but it's on the order of months between real cleanings, if ever. Know how you get off a plane and the hair on the back of your head feels greasy? Yep, jets are not airtight, they're pressurized. Huge difference. We're pressurized because of a constant, controlled leak through what is called the outflow valve, so you're always getting fresh air from the engines. Yes, that's right, from the engines. The engines compress air very well prior to burning the air with jet fuel, kerosene. Let's call a jet engine for what it is. One big open-ended diesel engine. Diesel, kerosene, heating oil, etc. all are very closely related. The air we use for pressurization air conditioning is tapped off of the compressor stage of the engine and, fun fact, it exits the engine toward the cabin at about 400-600 degrees Celsius. Well, jet aircraft have air conditioning packs, pressurization and air conditioning kit, and ACMs, air cycle machines. The pack is so good at what it does that, by the time the conditioned air is entering the cabin, it's near freezing and has to be made warmer, otherwise you'd look like Jack Nicholson at the end of The Shining within about 20 minutes lol. I worked with a pilot that was really old. He couldn't stay awake in flight. The first officer kept having to poke him and wake him up. We kept feeding him black coffee but it didn't help much. I asked him if he was retiring soon but he said he couldn't afford it because our airline has no pension program and the pay scale is pathetic. Pretty scary. My boyfriend is a pilot on a Phenom 300. People that fly in his jet are constantly having sex. They drink and have raunchy sex while him and his captain have to sit there and listen because it's only a curtain and not a door. They leave used condoms and CM stains all the time. He is the unlucky one that has to Clorox wipe it all off when they get out. Also, when his passengers are annoying and drinking, he will decrease the cabin pressure so the alcohol hits them much harder and they go to sleep. Nobody is ever pronounced dead on a commercial flight. The crew will perform CPR until the body is removed from the plane. Otherwise, the coroner's office can impound the aircraft for days until their investigation is complete. If a physician on board declares the patient dead, well, bummer for the airline. More than once I came into work to find a deceased passenger in the locker room, waiting for the coroner to pick up the body. Also, dead people are transported as cargo on commercial flights. We refer to them as human remains. If you see a long rectangular cardboard box the size of a coffin being carefully loaded into a cargo bin by several rampers, it's human remains. Not a pilot or FA, but once when I was flying to Chicago we had some mechanical problems. It sounded like an engine went out. The pilot got on the mic and said that the reverse thrusters went out in one of the engines and we needed to make an unscheduled stop somewhere in BFE. The plane landed, but took a really long time to stop. We all were put on another plane going to Chicago and were told to just grab an open seat. I later asked a pilot friend of mine about that. I wondered why a problem with the reverse thruster in an engine would be caused to make an emergency landing. He told me that it wasn't. The reverse thrusters get pressurized when the landing gear goes down, so they can't be used mid-flight. There is nothing serious about them going out that would require an emergency stop. He then told me that the pilot lied to us, as it was probably something much more serious like the engine going out. Just like I thought. I might be a little wrong on the details, since this was almost 10 years ago. I could see that as a let's avoid an emergency landing. Let's land out here in BFE with a long runway and low traffic where landing without reverse thrust is not an issue. Let's not take a plane with passengers and wonky reverse thrust into midway in the rain or snow. Smart risk management. Not a crew member, but I can give you something interesting. Big planes have some fancy systems dedicated to giving pilots info on the movement of planes that are very nearby and providing instructions to avoid collisions, called TCAS. If another plane ever gets close enough to the one you're on to make TCAS yell at the pilots to perform an evasive maneuver, you'll probably never know. TCAS issues a few levels of warnings that start when planes are still quite far apart, allowing pilots to respond to these rare situations with much gentler maneuvers than a layman might expect. No need for high-G stuff that would make the plane harder to control and disturb the passengers. Just an innocuous climb or descent that we'd gloss right over in the back. It's not radar, it's part of the transponder and is just two aircraft's transponders talking to each other and giving them altitude readouts and direction based on bearing from a directional antenna. You seem to be insinuating that a resolution advisory happens regularly when it doesn't. That's only a last resort if ATC fricks up and the pilots have to separate themselves. An uncle who was a BA first officer, Captain's B, as he put it, on Concorde, 1987, North Atlantic just south of Greenland, 1,140 IS, 55,000 feet, per military radars. A flight of Soviet fighters were practicing intercepts against it. The captain himself didn't know until they were informed on the ground. I'd have gone to flight level 62 and got ours to at least 1,200 if I'd have known. Nobody short of an SR-71 could intercept that. Not a pilot and didn't happen in flight, but I saw the pilot watching pee in the cockpit, on a laptop, when boarding the plane. Felt very inappropriate. Definitely, absolutely, without question a pilot. Spirit Airlines doesn't actually have planes. They put you on a bus and catapult it across the planet. An arguably more ambitious feature than flying a plane. Saw inside a cockpit when we flew back home from Orlando to Norway and the pilot was asleep. I kinda freaked out for a second, but the attendee said it's normal. It freaked me out too much. Then the second co-pilot waved at me and said hello in some other language. Air traffic controller here. Some of my favorite things we catch pilots doing is when they accidentally key up and give the cabin brief on the emergency frequencies instead of their internal comms. It's inevitably followed by a string of people keying up to say you're on guard for about a minute. Not a pilot but interested in aviation. In case of emergencies, a pilot puts in a squawk code and they all have different meanings. 7,500 hijacking, 7,600 radio malfunction, 7,700 emergency. Also 7,500 fly information with jets, 7,600 ATC shuts up, 7,700 priority landing everywhere. I've heard the mnemonic as 75, taken alive, 76, radio glitch, 77, going to heaven. I kind of prefer that, even if it is a little morbid. As a pilot, I can say that sometimes at a certain altitude you will see a evil clown standing on the wing. The best thing to do is ignore it and pull the visor down and try not to look at it or listen to its manic laughter. There is an alarming amount of things that can be broken in upon a minimum equipment list, and the airplane can still fly. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.